Welcome back, everyone, to Progressively Incorrect. I am your host, Zach Groeschel, and today we are going to be sort of updating ourselves on the state of AI, but specifically, how can we use it in a coaching or in a teaching context in alignment with the science of learning and evidence-informed teaching techniques. I don't feel like we've been able to talk about that enough on this podcast, and I've brought Nathan Lang-Raad to come and kind of give us his expertise on it, which I am so excited about. Just a few notes about our sponsors. This podcast is brought to you by John Catt Educational, which publishes some of the best books in education, including my book, Just Tell Them, The Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching. You can check out all of the John Catt books on their website, and I will provide you a link to their catalog and get yourself some books. Also, I wanted to plug some of the STEP Lab events that I'm hosting this year and in an ongoing fashion in the United States and Canada. STEP Lab is a company that uses an approach to coaching called responsive coaching. We're making a movement here when it comes to coaching being more evidence-informed and more systematic and explicit. So go ahead and check us out, STEP Lab. Nathan, how are you doing today?
Hey, Zach, fantastic. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I've been a listener for a while now and really appreciate your perspectives and the guests you bring on. So it's an honor to finally be a part of that.
I'm so happy you can come on here. Tell us a bit about, your kind of your elevator pitch of, what you do.
Yeah, so I am an educator, author, speaker. I started off as a teacher. I was a high school science teacher. I worked at NASA for a bit, was a principal, elementary principal, high school principal, been a director of curriculum and instruction for a large school district, and have worked in the ed tech publishing world as well. So now I am a full-time consultant working with districts and organizations across the globe around the intersection of teaching and technology, and also some instructional coaching work as well.
And you use that word consultant, which is like it's the word I use too. And it's a rough pitch, but what I would say is you're one of the good guys. You're one of the guys looking specifically at combing through what they're doing and meeting these schools where they're at. Did I sense a little hesitancy in the word consultants when you said that? Was there just a tinge of that when you said it?
You know, it's interesting. I think, with you and I, Zach, because we started out, I'm making some assumptions here based on what I know, but, we started off in the classroom. We started off as a teacher. And so really, I know for me, I can speak for myself, education is the core of who I am and everything that I do. So I always approach all of my work through how can we make teachers' lives better and how can we help improve learning instruction for students. So yeah, like I know that there in the space there are a lot of I'll put quotes around experts and I think there are a lot of experts out there who specialize in very specific things. And so I think you have to just be really confident in who you are and the value that you can bring to districts.
I love it. Well, my first question to you here is we both agreed we don't want to make an AI episode, but we're going to be talking about AI. We're going to be talking about it because we're trying to embed great teaching practices into every classroom and every school. We're talking about retrieval practice, the worked examples, scaffolding, spacing, and interleaving. And it seems like there are opportunities to make teaching more efficient with the use of generative AI tools, but also that there can be certain pitfalls. And I'm just curious, how are you navigating that space right now?
Yeah, it's interesting, Zach, because there is a lot of hype around AI right now, and you think about, okay, so AI has transformed society and transformed a lot of maybe our personal lives. And then so we also see a lot around how does AI impact my professional world? And how does AI, if you're an educator, is AI impacting my teaching? And then, of course, the other corollary to that is my students are using AI right now, and they're using it to cheat, for example. And that's the thing you hear the most from educators around AI. And so typically those big questions kind of steal the show for AI. So I'm really glad that you framed today's topic around, how can AI really advance what we know about research-based, evidence-based practices around the cognitive science of learning, around retrieval practice and space practice and interleaving and so forth. So I would say there's not a lot, which I'm glad we're having this conversation today, Zach, but there really isn't a lot of support out there, I think, for teachers who are using the learning sciences as their instructional framework and also using AI to help them teach. And I think it's important because a lot of our textbooks may not have interleaving and spaced practice and retrieval practice embedded. So there's already a gap or a need there for an AI to come alongside a teacher and say, how can I incorporate these kinds of strategies into my lesson? So I'll start there in our conversation of here's a problem that we see, and then there's also a need for us to use AI in a very meaningful way.
I love that. And and what we get is two extremes where some folks, the sort of maybe the bad trad side of things, what I call it, right? Where it's like there is no way I'm going to use this tool. I will be kicking and screaming. I would never do that because I know I know my subject much better than this somewhat dumb tool does. I have great resources and explanations, stories that are just transcend anything that could be done. But then you get people who I've seen slowly adopting certain aspects for certain areas that it's just automating or it's expanding or what they were already doing. So yeah, I'd love to hear kind of maybe your thinking on this.
They really are just token prediction mechanisms. So, for example, what I mean by that is based on probability on the data sets they were trained on. So, if you ask an AI, if you put a prompt, the best way to start your morning is dot dot dot, and you let it finish, predict the next part of the sentence, which is what AI does. It's going to give you a variety of different answers depending on who is asking and at what point of the year that question is being asked. And so a probability would say, okay, about 80% of the time, it's probably going to give you an answer maybe about coffee, or it might give you an answer about exercise, maybe like 10, 15% or exercise. And so there are, five or six possible different scenarios there. So it is based on prediction and probability. So it explains a lot why you're going to get different answers every time you ask it. And it also explains why there may be hesitation in using the tool. And so that's why we really have to think about every time we use the tool, we have to give a lot of context. And so, for example, if you're asking your AI to create a lesson plan around adding fractions with unlike denominators, it's going to give you a lesson, and it could frame the lesson from a perspective maybe that, an inquiry-based perspective. It could go from explicit direct instruction-based perspective. We don't know. It could be a UBD perspective. So unless you give it the context, it's just going to go on the data set it was trained on. So that's goes back to your statement earlier, Zach, that we really do have to leverage our own expertise. And if I expect my AI to give me solid cognitive learning science kind of outputs, then my inputs better have a lot of cognitive learning science in the input itself.
That's tough, but it's also good news for those of us who've been spending a lot of time
Yeah,
working with teachers to gain these insights.
yeah.
It's that wasn't a waste of time. That actually we cannot take the teacher out of this. And I suppose you can if AI is the personalized learning software, that's a whole different ballgame. We're talking about as a teacher partnering with something to teach a whole class lesson. We cannot take those cognitive science insights out of the teacher's mind because they will use those to help AI think with and design with. Anything more to say on that? Because you did put that so eloquently.
I think about just the use cases for AI and being able to understand. Like, for example, I will share. I was doing some prompting with AI around cognitive load theory, and when I was asking for some specific examples that's going to take into account cognitive load theory, it assumed the opposite of what I was expecting it. So I was going from more of the intrinsic kind of load part of the cognitive load theory, but it was going more with the extraneous. So it was making the assumption that I was already making the lesson too easy. So it was going to really focus on the extraneous load part instead of the intrinsic load piece of load. So again, we have to many times AI, because it gives answers quickly and there's a confidence to an AI, we automatically, as humans, trust that. And so if a teacher maybe is new to cognitive load theory and they haven't understood the difference between extraneous load and intrinsic load, and then you ask AI to give you problems that are going to take into account cognitive load theory, and you start to read through these examples, unless you have some prior knowledge of cognitive load theory, you're not going to recognize, oh, there's an hallucination here. Oh, let me tweak the prompt a bit, which is great. I mean, we should have this iterative process with the prompt. So it really speaks to before it goes back to really, I think the paradigm shift with any technology before we start to jump into any kind of technology fad or bandwagon. And I do think AI is legitimate and it's going to be it already is transformative and it's going to continue to be transformative. But you have to really understand exactly about, how is this going to change my teaching? How is this going to incorporate what research has shown about teaching? And how's this going to impact my students?
That is such a good example with cognitive load theory. I'm so because actually, if you think about it, is it's been trained in the database of what most people know.
Yeah,
Now that you say it, that's what most people would
yeah,
only interpret cognitive load theory of being is maybe distractions. Like just make sure the classroom environment is
yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
have distractions in it. And it doesn't even think about the other element is the load of the task
yeah.
and the prior knowledge of the learner at that point in time. And that is such a good example. I have another one
Okay.
where I was trying to talk it to using kind of a Zig Engelman like example, non-example type of thing. Use
Yeah,
minimally different examples, use
yeah,
sameness examples. But in conversation, when we're talking to people, we use a lot of different variations of wording because it feels more natural. Where in a direct instruction approach, you really are going to say, "Is this that? Is this that?"
yeah.
You're going to keep the words stable so that the attention is on the categorical question or the example itself, and we're not going to keep changing it to avoid and bypass and go around. We're going to just say avoid, avoid, avoid every time. And so it was like AI was trying to be nice and friendly, where I wanted it to be very more attentive to the economy of language and wording was another example.
Yeah, this goes back to the quality of prompting, and you're exactly right. I mean, AI is getting better at prompting, and it is also getting better at remembering, and especially with the new updates like with Claude and with ChatGPT, and I think all of these tools have updates where you can create projects and you can start to build in. You can increase its knowledge by putting it. So I can put Zach Groshel's research into a project. And every time I prompt it, and you can say only tap into the knowledge in this project. So it's only going to pull out your, nine research-based learning science strategies every time. And so, and you can train it to say, I want you to create, worked examples, explicit demonstrations showing, students the complete thought process for solving problems, step-by-step worked examples. You can start to train the model itself, kind of not really training it as in the data sets it's trained on, but within the project itself. So it is, sometimes I think we expect it to just read our minds, and so we want to use the least, we wouldn't use texting language with it. We use 5 words, build this for me using the worked examples theory. Well, we have to give it a little more than that. We have to train it itself to understand what a step-by-step worked example, finding common denominators looks like. We have to teach it what kinds of cognitive load am I talking about? Extrinsic, intrinsic, germane. What is that we're referring to specifically? So, yeah, I mean, I think there's an opportunity to even further our own professional development around these strategies by using AI and thinking about the inputs that we are using as opposed to really an output-driven process.
I love that. The other thing I'm thinking about is that there's a certain effect that comes from doing something yourself, right? Like actually generating your own response, producing something, making something, retrieving it from your own mind as opposed to offloading that responsibility on to something else. And I'm wondering, as like in the past when I did PD with teachers, I'd be like, so I want you to script out a minimal statement followed by a question, and then a statement and then a question. I was trying to get them to do a alternating type of interactive teaching, and then turn to your partner. I want you to teach them with that. I want you to revise it, and so on. You could take that same prompt, you could put it into AI. It would do it for you. I think it would do it relatively well. But then you lose the ability of the teacher to do that hard thinking
Yeah.
through scripting themselves. I'm curious, how do you navigate that space?
So this, Zach, takes discipline because we are evolved for taking mental shortcuts. It's just how we've evolved as a human species. And so if we once we start using AI, we understand, oh, it's already given us so much information without me having to think through it. And we understand the value of experience and going through the cognitive effort. And that's one of I think caveats and big concerns with AI of the future, not only for teachers in professional development, but for students who are using AI with learning tasks, is that they are going to use AI as a shortcut for learning without actually doing the cognitive work ourselves. And so that's a concern. And so that's why we have to really, you brought coaching into this too, Zach. I think about how as coaches we become springboards for ideas, we become thought partners, and that's how we have to look at AI whenever we're designing lessons, whenever we are engaging in PD, whenever students are tackling a task, is if we can use AI as a thought partner and we can tell the AI, I want you to give me your output, but in this kind of structure. And maybe even say, here, what are questions I should be asking myself? And so you have to still make the choice that I am going to engage in my own learning, but I'm using AI to help me in that process itself. So AI is not doing the thinking for me because it can't, but AI can give me a good framework or structure for me to build my own thinking.
Yeah, and that discipline is so hard because you're as a teacher, you're flying on the seat of your pants. You're
Yeah.
new to so many different things. The
Yeah.
planning can be the last thing on your mind because you've all of these formalities and
Yeah.
responsibilities that fall outside of teaching. I'm envisioning a project like you mentioned before in that is AI developed that actually would be able to withhold just enough knowledge like a coach would so that they can do the thinking themselves, that they would prompt
Yeah.
them to take action and to write out a script. I think it's possible, but that's going to require a sophisticated design based on how teachers learn and where they're at.
Yeah. Yeah, we have, as teachers, we have to see the value in cognitive learning science before we have AI design tasks for us using the principles. So we have to embody those ourselves. And so, for example, if we are prompting AI, let's say, to focus on the strategy of self-explanation. So I want to incorporate self-explanation techniques, still using, let's say, like if you're teaching, fifth grade math lessons. So adding fractions. So I want my students to be able to explain their problem solving process in their own words. Well, they're not going to be doing that if they're just regurgitating what the AI has said. So you have to create a almost like a structure, and you could ask AI, and the teachers could do this as well. Ask them to create a structured template to record their thinking while they are, going through these worked examples, or while they are working through an error analysis. And so that would be an interesting thought experiment is you're designing a lesson or you are going through your own professional development. You ask the AI to purposely include misconceptions about teaching and learning, or I'm going to do an error analysis on my own professional development. And you prompt the AI to do this. And you go through the, I mean, I could see spending a couple of hours with an AI and your own kind of professional development and this banter back and forth, and being able to then reflect on, okay, what is the error in this particular like learning theory or something, you know?
Absolutely. And so far, we've mentioned more sophisticated uses, more techniques in teaching that are much more difficult. We mentioned self-explanation and managing
Yeah,
cognitive load and example, non-example. I think we're
yeah,
already there to like, if you know what a problem's supposed to look like creating problem sets. That are interleaved and spaced out. I think we're there now. It's like those are the things that are sort of teacher proof or error proof in a sense where I can just ask it, it will do it. Make 14 of these for me. It's those other
yeah.
things that really are what I are the heart of teaching that are require a lot more prompting.
It does. And even space practice, for example, many times, and it's the beauty of being able to say, create in a 3 week period, I'm teaching this standard or I'm teaching the addition of unlike denominators and fractions, create a 3 week calendar. And I want you to help me scaffold and build problem sets for these 3 weeks. Because again, like, yes, that is kind of maybe like the low-hanging fruit part of this. But that being said, there is something kind of beauty in the simplicity of it, and also the fact that it solves a problem that many of us have because we don't always have access to resources that have spaced problems or interleaving as a part of our curriculum. And so it is solving an immediate need and problem for us. So I think we think about, what are those things that we are asking AI to do that's going to help us from kind of an administrative perspective, like building a 3 week unit calendar out, or versus that kind of AI that's going to help me reflect on my practice, that's going to help push me in my thinking. Like that, it really goes back to the focusing on outputs, which maybe is that calendar and those interleaving problems versus inputs. And those things that I have those conversations I have with the AI that's going to help push my thinking. And there is a brilliant study done this past year, last year around backwards planning. And the study was done with teachers who use AI with different use cases. And so they found out that teachers, there's 3 kinds of uses for AI. We have output driven, those teachers who just create a worksheet, 10 problems, interleave, bam. That's output driven. Input was, help me reflect on my practice, create, a lesson that helps differentiate learning, personalized learning, all that. And then those teachers who do both. And interestingly found that the teachers who do both have more confidence and also have higher achievement gains because they're not only being smart with the AI being resourceful, but they're also have clearer thinking and have higher agency because they're using AI for the input piece as well. And so then they say, okay, now that we can use AI for inputs and outputs, how do we design learning, maybe using if you're using a kind of a UBD model where you're looking at, goals that what are the outcomes, what assessments can I design, and what are the learning strategies? You use that in your workflows, and that's going to help, push me to be a better teacher, again, on the outputs and the inputs.
This is right up my alley right now and just what I've been thinking about and you're pushing me to think a bit about it too because I I think I just want to end on this kind of something we started with. I gave you that example of the teacher who is resistant because they're possibly so expert, and that this is not necessarily going to do anything in their view, but bring down the level of what they're doing versus every other teacher. I'm just curious, like, do you think AI will be useful for the more experienced teachers, or is it really only for bringing up um, teachers that are low on time and low on resources, or possibly don't have the skills, and this will just kind of bring them up to a certain level, you know?
I think everyone can benefit from AI, but you bring in an interesting perspective with there is a spectrum. We have those who are experts in AI, and they are going to use AI very differently than those who are novice AI users. And I think, just like with any new attack or any new initiative that we are approaching in education, we have to be mind. I use the acronym, the MASH acronym, MASH. M is mindful, A is being adaptable, S is being synergistic. That means, what are the parts of my own professional development, my own human experience, and then bring in that technological piece of it as well. So, what's the synergy between technology and pedagogy? And the H is kind of that holistic. How does this fit into the whole teaching and learning paradigm? And so I think of it through the kind of the MASH lens for more of a thoughtful, systematic integration. But I will say, I'm not one of these people who, yes, I get very excited about tech, but I also understand that for many years, especially with ed tech, and I worked in various different ed techs, and I know that sometimes teachers feel like they're getting incomplete recipes, and so it's like going online and you're finding a recipe, and then you have to scroll down like all the way to the bottom, like to
Yeah.
find the recipe. And then you get there and it's very vague, like season the vegetables. They give these very vague kind of directions, and so then you're in the kitchen trying to figure out, like, well, how long do I saute the vegetables? What seasoning do I add to the vegetables? How crisp do they have to be? Like, you have all these quiet, and you're having to figure all this out. And also another knowledge I like to use is, many times with ed tech, we are given IKEA solutions for very complex problems, and that's frustrating for teachers. So I did want to acknowledge that AI may feel like this right now because it's so new, and so you're having to figure out how to use AI in a very meaningful way and feel like you have an incomplete recipe or feeling you have an IKEA solution for a very complex problem. And so it really is, it's about experience. It's about just taking that next step with, is it practicing with outputs? Is it practicing better prompting patterns or inputs? Whatever that next step looks like for the teacher, allow yourself to go there and see the value. And then you say, okay, now I'm good at this particular aspect of maybe prompting. Let me try this now. Or now that I've asked the AI to create an interleave set, now I want to look at elaborative questioning. Like, how can I use this next, piece of learning science? So there's a spectrum there, and I think we have to honor that spectrum in our own learning.
I love it. Nathan, it is so great to meet with you here on the podcast. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Progressively Incorrect. It is just a joy for me to be able to talk to you, but please feel free to reach out to me and start a conversation. This movement around evidence-based practice and really great teaching is just so fulfilling to me, and I appreciate all of your support. Nathan and listeners, take care.